This is The World This Weekend. Hello, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Canada has honoured this country's veterans with Remembrance Day ceremonies.
It's important to realize that people fought and died for these luxuries that we have, the freedom and the way we can live our lives. We can do anything in this country.
Also, a doctor describes the dire situation inside Gaza's largest hospital.
It's continuous bombardment, so it's totally war zone. It's totally scary atmosphere here in the hospital.
And as the Hollywood actors' strike comes to an end, we look at its impact on Hollywood North and how long before productions in this country are back in action. That's later, but first. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to reject calls for a ceasefire. We won't stop until the mission is completed, he says. The war against Hamas is progressing in full swing. Inside Gaza, the largest hospital, Al-Shifa, is facing an increasingly desperate situation. Battles raging outside, no power inside, and no way to leave. Israel's military says Hamas uses Al-Shifa and other hospitals as command posts. Briar Stewart reports from Jerusalem.
When Israeli forces launched strikes on Gaza, tens of thousands flooded the Al-Shifa Hospital, hoping it would be a sanctuary from the fighting. But now battles between Hamas and the Israeli military unfold all around it.
It's all kinds of bombardments, gunshots from the sea, from the airstrikes, from the drones.
That's Dr. Ahmed Halalati, the head of the plastic surgery department at Al-Shifa. He spoke to CBC News today in a series of short calls because the phone line kept cutting out.
Sorry, the internet connections all over the area.
What is that noise?
The mobile data. That's the easy gunshot.
As Halalati spoke, explosions and shots could be heard in the background. He says most of the operating rooms had to be shut down because there was no electricity and little fuel. The Hamas-run health ministry said that 2 babies died after a generator shut down. Halalati estimated that there are around 500 patients still in the hospital, some critically ill.
We have 63, patients in the ICU with ventilators. They have to evacuate them to places where the ventilators will be provided.
Israel says it isn't targeting Al-Shifa and other Gaza hospitals, but the Hamas fighters based in their vicinity, including in tunnels underneath buildings and in underground command centers. For days, Israel has been urging people to evacuate to the relative safety of the south, and officials say more than 150,000 have made the journey over the past 3 days.
The east side of the hospital is open for the safe pass of Gazans.
And Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari says tomorrow the forces will help evacuate some of the most vulnerable.
The staff of the Shifa Hospital has requested that tomorrow we will help the babies in the pediatric department to get to a safer hospital.
According to the Hamas-run health ministry, Israeli forces have killed more than 11,000 Palestinians in Gaza since October 7th, when Hamas militants attacked Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking around 240 hostages, including infants. The Israeli government says bringing back the hostages is its priority, and tonight hundreds marched in Tel Aviv demanding their release. Israel wants the world to remember Hamas's heinous crimes, given that there's mounting global outrage over the dire situation in Gaza. Israel says it won't stop until it eliminates Hamas and issued a warning to Hezbollah militants who vow to step up their attacks on northern Israel. The country's defense minister says Hezbollah is playing with fire, warning, quote, "What we can do in Gaza, we can also do in Beirut." Briar Stewart, CBC News, Jerusalem.
More foreign nationals may be able to exit Gaza soon. The Rafah crossing into Egypt has been closed since Friday. Today, Gaza's border authority announced the crossing would reopen tomorrow for foreign passport holders. I spoke to CBC's Tom Perry in Cairo for more on that. So, Tom, this sounds like good news for the Canadians hoping to get out of Gaza.
It does, but as we keep saying, things are fluid here. The Rafah crossing has been closed yet again for the past 2 days. Canadian diplomats in Egypt, they've been able to bring in more than 100 people with ties to Canada. So that's citizens, that's permanent residents, their families, and they've been bringing them in by bus to Cairo. But federal officials hoped that this would all move a lot faster. Today, we spoke with Julie Sunday. She's an assistant deputy minister at Global Affairs Canada. She was also recently appointed to handle the hostage file for the government, so specifically the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th. So Sunday was in Cairo today, and I asked her about the Rafah crossing and all the problems they've been having there. And here's what she said.
Like this is incredibly frustrating. We want the Canadians to move out. We want all of the foreign nationals to move out. Right now, I think Israel said last week when I spoke with them, so it's probably higher now, there were around 1,600 out of 7,500. We need, more people out every day.
So the hope is that we will see more Canadians leave Gaza tomorrow. But if we've learned anything about the border between Gaza and Egypt, it's that the situation there, it's unstable, it's unpredictable. So even if this does open tomorrow, the question is for how long?
Okay, CBC's Tom Perry in Cairo. Thank you so much, Tom, for all your work there.
Thank you.
Remembrance Day ceremonies have been held across Canada, tributes to the veterans who have served this country. In Ottawa, there was a sea of poppies at the National War Memorial where thousands gathered, looking back at past conflicts and also at the state of the military today. JP Tasker was there.
I can never get through the last post. When they play that, I'm always very emotional.
Wendy Sewell was the fourth female pilot to earn her wings in the Royal Canadian Air Force. She took to the skies in 1980.
The things that I really treasure about my career was flying around the world in the Hercules and showing the Canadian flag.
She's one of several thousand people who made the pilgrimage to Ottawa.
It's important to realize that people fought and died for these luxuries that we have, the freedom and the way we can live our lives. We can do anything in this country.
William Lewis was an Army pilot.
I just got into the tail end of the Korean one.
This year marks the 70th anniversary of the armistice in that conflict.
I've had some close calls, but not very many. And I got 39 years of service. I think about my friends that didn't make it back. I feel very bad. This is the second year I haven't been able to march with the veterans here. I'm over 90 years of age now.
Paul Baden was a Navy man.
8,000 hours in the air chasing Soviet submarines during the Cold War.
He says service members from that era didn't come home to a hero's welcome. So much of what they did, still highly classified.
I mean, we always remember the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, Bosnia, Afghanistan, but nobody ever talks about the Cold War.
The Silver Cross mother, Gloria Hooper of Manitoba, represents all the military families who've lost someone. Her son Chris was killed in Bosnia. She lay a wreath as the Ottawa Children's Choir sang a familiar poem.
We have a son that's currently serving. It's always just been something we've done.
Susan Pittman of New Liskeard, Ontario, drove more than 5 hours to get just the perfect spot, watching the tomb of the unknown soldier as the red poppies piled up.
We need to remember these guys. They're giving us what we've got, and they're allowing us to do what we do. And if it wasn't for them, who knows what we would be in, what state.
All of this while the Canadian Armed Forces are deployed to the Middle East. The military says they are there for contingency planning. Wayne Eyre is the chief of the defense staff.
The study of our military history could almost be considered a study in unpreparedness.
Canada's top soldier says he's worried about proposed military budget cuts.
We have to ensure that we can respond to this very, very uncertain and insecure world.
Governor General Mary Simon, dressed in a Navy uniform, brought a message. Remembrance Day is about more than battles or statistics. It's about the people. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
In London, ceremonies to remember the First World War came on the same day as a huge pro-Palestinian march. At least 300,000 protesters took part in the rally. While there were scuffles between far-right counter-protesters and police, the day was largely peaceful. But as Philip Lee Shannock tells us, controversial comments made during the week had already made it a hot political topic.
Free, free! Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of London, waving Palestinian flags and calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The rally took place on Armistice Day, when people in Britain marked the end of the First World War. The country's Home Secretary, or Interior Minister, Suella Braverman, sparked controversy this week by calling pro-Palestinian protests disrespectful of their veterans.
These are hate marches. Chanting of jihad on the streets of Britain in the 21st century is utterly despicable.
One protester, who gave her name as Julia and brought her infant son in a stroller, disagrees.
It's completely ironic that it was being called a hate march. I couldn't stand for that, and to be honest, it made me want to come even more.
There were concerns that Braverman's comments in an op-ed she wrote, suggesting that police are biased towards protesters, would incite violence. London's Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist says a small counter-protest by far-right groups clashed with police.
A number of groups within this counter-protest who were split off and seem intent on seeking confrontation with the main Palestinian march.
He says fewer than 100 were arrested and charged with weapons, drugs, and assault offenses. Pro-Palestinian protesters were also detained and investigated for using fireworks and face coverings. But some expressed concerns for their safety. Justin Cohen from Jewish News says with a reported tenfold rise in anti-Semitic incidents in London, many Jewish people avoided downtown.
There has been plenty of hate expressed on these marches over the last 4 weeks. We've seen calls for the eradication of the State of Israel.
Emily Hilton is one of the organizers of British Jews Against Occupation. She said it was important for her to be part of the protest to show that demanding a stop to Israel's operation in Gaza is not anti-Semitism.
This idea that Jewish safety relies on the oppression of Palestinians is fundamentally false and wrong.
The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, defended the democratic rights of those who took part in the march.
One of the cornerstones of our democracy is the right to protest. That should be, lawful, peaceful, and safe.
And he blamed far-right scenes of disorder on Braverman's comments, a minister who Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has continued to support. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
To the U.S. now, where the FBI has seized cell phones belonging to New York Mayor Eric Adams. It's part of the Bureau's ongoing investigation into Adams' campaign financing. The FBI is looking into whether members of Adams' campaign conspired to illegally funnel donations from the Turkish government through fake donors. Eric Adams himself is not accused of any wrongdoing. He says he has nothing to hide. In Sudan, the war between the country's army and a rival paramilitary group is raising concerns about violence against civilians. Clementine Nkweta Salamni is the UN humanitarian coordinator for Sudan. She says around 25 million people, more than half the population, are in need of humanitarian aid and protection.
We continue to receive unrelenting and appalling reports of sexual and gender-based violence, enforced disappearance, arbitrary detentions, and grave violations of human and children's rights.
There have also been reports of ethnically driven killings in the state of West Darfur since the paramilitary group took control of its capital. Rice cultivation in India goes back thousands of years, and the country remains the world's top exporter of rice. But floods and droughts caused by climate change have made India's rice crop extremely vulnerable. Now many farmers are switching to another staple grain, millets. CBC's South Asia correspondent Salima Shivji reports.
In the heart of Maharashtra's farmland in western India, Balu Gore picks up a rake as he prepares his field, his hands clutching a bag of millet seeds. It takes only a few months to grow, and it's easy to sell them at the market. It's the best option for us farmers, he says. The humble millet is making a comeback in India. Once a staple in traditional Indian cooking, the unassuming cereal fell out of favor for decades when rice and wheat took over, buoyed by government subsidies. Rice was where the money was, so everyone switched, 60-year-old farmer Kashinath Kole says. The demand for millets dropped. Compare that to today. Kole's small village has a seed bank where local farmers get millet seeds for free so they can try to grow them. 30-year-old Aka Gore also has a processing machine to refine the harvested millets, which nets farmers a higher price at the local market. We've been reminded of the benefits, she says, how much easier it is to grow millets. The sustainable seed is so strong, it can grow on arid land that won't support any other crop. It doesn't need the vast amounts of water that rice does. It's not just in rural India that the long-neglected millet is having a resurgence. At this pub night in bustling Mumbai, there are millet, tacos, and pizza on the menu.
It's high in protein. It's also tasty.
And the beer on tap is made using sugar extracted from millets instead of malted barley, a conscious decision from the brewmasters at Pune's Great State Ale Works.
As a craft brewery, we love experimenting and doing new things.
Nakul Bhosle's forefathers were farmers, so he found it particularly enticing to experiment with millet to help those working the land and to save the environment.
Millets ho gaye, rice ho gaya.
A natural choice for the Indian government to promote. It persuaded the United Nations to declare this the International Year of the Millet. Officials are hoping for a millet craze to catch on globally, much like with quinoa or kale. The healthy millet touted as a fix-all that can also tackle the devastating effects of climate change. It's one of the reasons Pallavi Upadhyay started her company, Millets for Health, which promotes the cereal as the ancient Indian superfood.
Climate change is really, it's a reality that's staring us in the face. So going back to indigenous seeds, indigenous varieties, foods like millets is really helpful in that sense.
But some say the Indian government could be doing more than simply marketing millets when other grains have aggressive subsidies attached to them.
Millets are very, very important.
Vijaya Raghavan is a professor at McGill University's Bioresource Engineering Department.
The subsidy would help for the farmers so that they stay competitive in their production area.
For some farmers toiling in their fields, that would be a welcome relief. I'd love to grow millets instead of rice. The other farmers get such a good price for it, Balu Kare says, as he struggles to pull his oxen behind him. But I can't. I don't have the space for millets in my field. He's resigned to it, unable to switch to the once neglected millet seed that's suddenly back in vogue. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Bari Village in Maharashtra.
Hundreds of Canadians received postcards this week, replicas of messages sent by Canadian soldiers fighting in Europe during the First World War. It's part of a project by a professor at Western University meant to connect Canadians to the past by giving them a glimpse into life during the war. Ithil Musa reports.
The postcard is basically the text message of the First World War. This is what people use to communicate.
History professor Jonathan Vance has spent more than a decade collecting postcards from the First World War. Thousands of them sent back and forth between soldiers and their families.
And there is Canadian Field Artillery, I think. And this gentleman is very splendid and is also Canadian Field Artillery.
To mark Remembrance Day, Vance and a small team of researchers at Western University sent replicas of some of those postcards to the Canadian addresses that originally received them more than a century ago.
The postcards remind people that men and women who served in uniform, who died overseas, they lived in the houses we know, they walked on the streets that we know, they went to the schools and the churches we know. 1914 seems an eternity ago. It's really not that long ago.
Vance says the postcards were meant to keep people connected to their communities, and they rarely focused on the brutalities of war.
They wanted to know exactly what was going on at home, because that was a way to root themselves in their own family, in their own past, their own experience. So you get everything from birth of new kittens to we're putting an addition on the shed to the cars being fixed.
Riley Brooks helped Vance make sure the reproductions reached the intended homes, sometimes using Google Maps Street View to make sure they were still standing.
A lot of love went into this project. Connecting the past to the present is one of the most fascinating things ever. And I just hope Canadians take a second to, think about the past, especially on Remembrance Day.
When Robert Mason enlisted for military service with the Canadian Engineers.
Richard Janicki in Ottawa says that's exactly what receiving a postcard did.
It was a moment where we got to connect with the history of this house and this community.
Janicki received a reproduction of a postcard sent by soldier Robert Mason, whose family once occupied his home. Janicki says in receiving Mason's postcard, he couldn't help but think of the wars that continue to rage today and the impact they have on those who cannot escape.
It provides more of an opportunity to reflect the millions of families that are lost through the act of war.
History professor Jonathan Vance.
It's a good way for people to remember how fortunate they are that these sorts of things aren't happening in our neighborhoods, in our country.
Vance says he hopes those who receive a replica postcard will reflect on that, as well as the service and sacrifices of Canada's veterans. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. A big victory in the tennis world with Canada into the final at the Billie Jean King Cup for the first time ever after topping the Czech Republic today. Canada will take on Italy Sunday for the title in the Premier International Women's Team competition. Canada won the men's equivalent, the Davis Cup, for the first time a year ago. Well, after months of picketing, Hollywood is getting back to work. The Actors Union has reached a tentative deal with Hollywood studios. Members will start voting to ratify it on Tuesday. The strikes have also affected Hollywood North, given how deeply entwined the Canadian and U.S. entertainment industries are. For his take on what happens next, I spoke to Canadian producer Martin Katz. He's the founder and president of Toronto-based Prospero Pictures. So, Martin, can you explain what kind of impact the writers and actors' strikes have had on the Canadian film and television industries?
Well, there's over $9 billion worth of production in Canada. And about half of that is foreign production. And so the 245,000 people who work in our industry, half of them work for, American shows that are in production here. And during the 6 months of the two strikes, that production almost completely dried up. So you can imagine the disaster for those people and the other people who work in indirectly affected jobs like, catering and driving, and dry cleaning that have all been affected by the disappearance of this significant part of our economy.
How long do you think it could take before we see Hollywood productions in Canada getting back to those pre-strike levels?
Well, that's a really significant question. Of course, the strike ended at midnight Thursday, and the first thing that happened is promotion. Of course, people who were actors in film and television productions that had been already completed were not allowed to promote any of their productions. So that started immediately. The next thing that'll happen is post-production and then actual production. But I don't think it'll be till January at the earliest before we really see things start to pick up.
And then when that happens, is there any indication of what kinds of productions will be up and running first?
Well, very often it's television that's ready to go first. They've created scripts that are ready to go. And of course, they're already cast if they're ongoing productions. The feature films that were interrupted could come back next. And feature films that were about to start, those will be the last ones to come in. And so there's a level of chaos in Hollywood about what's going to go first and who's going to work on what. And I expect that will take some time to roll out.
One thing that you mentioned, these strikes didn't just affect writers and actors. There are so many other people that work in this industry: drivers, caterers, set decorators, hair and makeup artists. It goes on and on and on. Many of these people, we've heard, have had to find other work. They had to leave the industry altogether to make up for what they were losing while the strike was happening. Do you think that could affect things getting back on track?
I think it will affect things if you think about all of the people you've mentioned, but also, people who typically work in production, painters, carpenters, electricians, all of those people may well have gone out and gotten jobs in construction. And to bring them back now, it's going to take some months to reestablish a base of expert contributors in the film and television space.
Do you think then these strikes signal a need for more investment in productions that are written, directed, performed by Canadians?
I always think it's important for us to be focused on the stories that we tell that are written, directed, and performed by Canadians. There are obviously lots of shows, Hudson and Rex, Shoresy, Children Ruin Everything, sort of, that are completely homegrown and were unaffected by the strikes. The challenge for us with the Screen Actors Guild, a lot of Canadian actors are SAG members, but unlike any other union, I think, in the world, they purport to attach their jurisdiction to any production in which one of their employees works. And SAG is an extremely powerful union, and they require their members, wherever they work in the world, to follow their rules. And I don't know how we get away from that.
Martin, really great to chat. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Martin Katz is a producer and the founder and president of Prospero Pictures.
Memories light the corners of my mind.
And Barbra Streisand has been sifting through those memories lately, enough of them to fill a whole 992-page book. My Name is Barbara is out now, and the reviews say it's sharp, funny, and refreshingly candid.
Scattered pictures of the smiles we left behind.
It covers her 6-decade career, everything from stage fright to love letters and the songs and roles that made her a household name.
Don't bring around a cloud of rain on my parade.
Streisand's also correcting the record on some misconceptions about her ego and her relationship with fame. She talked about that with CBC's Pia Chattopadhyay. It's a Canadian broadcast exclusive interview that'll air tomorrow on CBC Radio's The Sunday Magazine. Here's just a bit of that conversation.
I'm certainly not a diva. I'm down to earth. I like to be quiet. I've never relived my life before. I never listened to my music. I don't watch my movies. I am a regular person. I just happen to have a bit of talent that communicates. It communicates with people. What can I tell you? I don't know how to describe it.
I'm just laughing at the modifier of a bit.
And we never let it end.
You can hear Pia Chattopadhyay's full interview with Barbra Streisand tomorrow morning on the Sunday Magazine, right after the 9 o'clock news. But we'll leave you with one more tidbit from the memoir, a little bit of Canadian content. Her short-lived romance with former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Babs describes him as very dapper, intelligent, intense, and kind of a combination of Albert Einstein and Napoleon, only taller. She says she was dazzled, even as she watched him dive naked into an icy lake and roll around in the snow.
Memories of the way we were.
And on that note, here's a little more of Barbra Streisand singing about the way we were. This has been The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.
As we left behind, smiles we gave to